Hello everyone and welcome to another JavaScript mastery video. How can I start learning web development? Is it easy? Where can I find learning resources? These are the questions that appear in every beginner's mind. In this video, I will give you an answer to all of them as well as provide you with the best resources to learn web development on your own. As I mentioned, by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what is needed to be a good developer. We'll firstly go over all the necessary tools and software. To start coding, we only need a few things. First one is a browser. Many developers use Google Chrome and they prefer it because it has some awesome built-in features for web developers. It has Chrome developer tools. Browser you most likely already have. If you have another browser, you can switch to Google Chrome or you can just stay with your old browser. The second program that we need is a code editor. I highly recommend Visual Studio Code. Many developers use it nowadays and it is extremely popular. The third thing that you may need, not now necessarily, is version control. Version control, like Git and GitHub, there are many differences between them, allow you to basically keep different versions of your code at certain points in time. For example, if you're working on a longer project that takes you, for example, 2-3 weeks, maybe months even, when you add a new feature, you're going to want to save the program at that point in time, so that maybe later, if you do something wrong, you can revert to that point in time. That is what version control is for. You do not need it at the start, but later you're definitely going to need it regardless of the path that you choose, and more on that later in this video. Now, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it is the most basic building block of the web. Hypertext refers to links that connect web pages to one another, either within a single page or between websites. HTML uses so-called markup to annotate text, images, and other content to display in a web browser. In other words, you have access to elements or tags such as head, title, body, header, footer, and so on. At its heart, HTML is a fairly simple language made up of elements which can be applied to certain text to give them different meaning in a document or a website. With HTML, you can define a structure of a web page. For example, you can add a header, you can separate the page into 3 different columns of content, you can add a navigation menu, and so on. You can also embed content such as images and videos into the page. To conclude, to build websites, you should know about HTML. It is the fundamental technology used to define the structure of a web page. HTML is used to specify whether your web page content should be recognized as a paragraph, list, heading, link, image, or any other available element. You can right now click on any element on this page in the YouTube and choose Inspect Element. So just right click and then Inspect Element to open up your browser's developer tools, and it will show you the current structure of the page that you're looking at. Now that you can see this, are you looking forward to learning it? The second stage of your learning are the basics of CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it is the first technology that you should start learning after HTML. While HTML is used to define the structure and semantics of your content, CSS is used to style it and lay it out. For example, you can use CSS to alter the font, color, size, and spacing of your content, split it into multiple columns, or even add some animations. You should first learn the basics of how it works, what the syntax looks like, and how you can start using it to add styling to the HTML. CSS is the first technology you should start learning with the HTML. As you can see right here, you can practice it simultaneously with HTML. You can do them both at the same time, moving back and forth between the topics. For example, you can create a div, or you can create a navigation bar, and then simply add some styling with the CSS to it and make it look nice. Right here, you can see some of the HTML beginner and CSS beginner topics that you should learn while learning HTML and CSS, of course. So first, you can start by learning HTML structure. This is the basic structure of any web page. At the top, we have the doc type, then we have the head element, and then the body element. And then you can learn how we put elements inside one another to make sense. Next on, we have the HTML tags. As I mentioned, there are some tags like head, body, div, we have h1, We have different headings, different paragraphs, many different tags. You can learn them all basically. The second thing that I would like you to learn is the HTML tags. As I mentioned before, there are many different HTML tags. Some of them are head, body, then we have the divs for different divisions. We have also headings, so H1, H2, H3, some paragraphs, images, videos, many different tags. Some of the tags request mandatory attributes. For example, if you want to display an image, you can use an image tag, but then you need to provide it an attribute called src or source. Inside of that attribute, you need to put the link of the image so that it properly displays on the web page. There are many different attributes that correspond to many different tags, so you can learn that as well. Next, you can move on to some CSS. I would dare to say that the CSS box model is the most important concept of all the CSS. We have padding, margin, and then just some width and height of the element. So you can learn that first. You can just Google CSS box model, or I can also leave you links in the description. Then we can learn positioning. So what are the different ways that you can position elements on the website? And the third most important thing, which is a bit more advanced right here, but also I would consider it a basic nowadays, is that you need to make your web pages responsive. What does that mean? Basically, nowadays people use tablets, phones, laptops, 4K monitors or Full HD monitors. You need to make your website look nice on all different displays. And this is where the media queries come in handy. Once you learn HTML and CSS that you're able to create a simple web page, then you can move on to the next stage. The next stage is also the hardest stage of learning web development. It is JavaScript. Most people say that they can even understand JavaScript up to some point, but they simply cannot recreate what they can see on the tutorials. And this is where the real problem lies. Also, there's so many frameworks and libraries, we are going to explain that later, when it comes to JavaScript. And many people just lose the track when it comes to learning JavaScript. It is the real programming language of the web. HTML and CSS were just markdown languages. You write something that simply makes sense to the web, but JavaScript is a real programming language. So why should you learn JavaScript? Well, more and more of the logic is making its way to the client side in order to facilitate lightning-fast user experiences. The second reason is that JavaScript is everywhere. It is even moving to the server side right now with a framework called Node.js. We are going to learn that in a moment. And the third reason is that JavaScript is, well, fun. With JavaScript, you can create some useful tasks that your web page elements will do. The real power of JavaScript actually lies when you start adding to it and when you start learning some of the most advanced things. So in here, I would recommend that we first start with the easy ones. We first need to know what variables are. Variables like in general sense and variables in JavaScript, how we can declare them, how we can use them, what are some different ways of declaring them. Then we need to know about data types. Which data types exist in JavaScript, how we can use them, how do they behave when we add them or try to add some different data types one to another. Then we need to know some basic operators. There are assignment operators, there is equality operators, and many different operators. You can just brush through them just by Googling operators in JavaScript. The third thing that we need to know is DOM, Document Object Model, and the events of the DOM. This is the first thing we're actually seeing the interaction of JavaScript in the browser. So you can just choose some elements, explore it, and then play with the browser. With the HTML and CSS you created, you can now add the JavaScript. The fourth thing are functions. Functions are like the main building block of JavaScript. Functions at the most basic level is just some block of code that can take in some input and then modify it and return some output. We're going to be using functions a lot through our JavaScript career. Also, with the functions, we can add the objects. You can learn what objects are, how to define them, how to structure them, what can go inside them, and how we can actually retrieve elements from the object. The sixth thing regarding JavaScript is logic and control flow. So in here, I'm talking about basic programming language skills. So how we do some if statements, switch statements, loops, while loop, for loop, function, objects, how we declare variables, and stuff like that. You need to learn how does the language work. And after all of that, we can move on to the fourth stage. Now, you know that the main fundamentals of the web are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now you learn the basics, but I would say before moving to some of the frameworks that we are going to see right now, I want you to master the fundamentals. Now you know that HTML and CSS and JavaScript are the fundamentals of the web. Everything else that you will learn will be based off of one of these three topics. Now is the time to learn by building projects. Build 1, 2, 3, 5, or even 10 different projects based on the technology that you know. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This is the perfect stage in which you can learn by building projects. Projects can be landing pages for some imaginary companies. You can even copy the style and look of the pages of the popular companies. Now you can create portfolio for yourself, photography portfolio, and you can also create hobby projects. For example, if you are playing soccer or any other sport, you can create a score counter or anything like that. When you master these fundamentals, then I would suggest to move on to frameworks, because then they're going to make much more sense. And here we are with the advanced topics. So what do I want you to learn with the advanced topics? CSS has new features of Flexbox and Grid, which allow you to style and structure your web page more easily. Now is also the time where version control comes in. You're going to be building projects, so you need to know how to do version control. Also, here's the deployment. Once you create some projects, and maybe when you create your own portfolio, you will want to deploy your projects. What does to deploy mean? It means that you're actually going to put your projects on the web. You're going to have an active link, and anyone with an internet connection will be able to access your real projects. And this is also the time when we want to expand our JavaScript skills. Now I'm talking about real programming skills, the one that you're going to use in real complex web applications. First, array and object methods. You need to know how arrays in a JavaScript behave, how we can manipulate them, what are some of the built-in methods that we can call on them, how can we filter some of the values from an array, how can we loop through it, how can we extract only some values, and stuff like that. When it comes to the objects, you need to know how to destructure the object, how to, for example, take only keys or only values from an object and turn it into an array, and so on. In here, you can also learn about classes, because classes in JavaScript are, well, nothing more than objects. Now is also the time to play with asynchronous JS. Asynchronous JS is closely connected to the API data fetching. So what those two things mean? Now when you start creating projects, you can also use different APIs. API stands for Application Programming Interface. Basically, it is a simple database that some other company created. You can search for fun API projects to do, so you can actually fetch real data coming from a certain API. I have already created a few videos that contain API data fetching on this channel. For example, YouTube has its own API. You can create your own YouTube clone application just using their API, and then you can simply display their videos. Also, there are some APIs for currencies, so you can just create a currency exchange calculator using their API. Asynchronous JS, in simplest terms, means that the JavaScript isn't going to be executed in a linear fashion. It is going to be asynchronous, meaning some code is going to need some time to be done, to be executed, and then we can do something else. So that means that you need to learn JavaScript promises and async await. As I mentioned, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are the main building blocks of the web. I put this meme on the left side just to give you some introduction to frameworks. The HTML doesn't need to load JS and CSS if the HTML and CSS are in JS. This may seem mind-blowing at first, but this is exactly what a front-end library, React, does. So now we can move on to frameworks. Now that you know the fundamentals of the web, I'm getting kinda repetitive here, you can start with frameworks. They allow you to build powerful single-page applications with organized and interactive user interfaces. That sure sounds amazing, right? So why would you use them? They are used to make building and working with programming languages easier. Frameworks typically take all the difficult repetitive tasks in setting up a new web application, and they either do the boring stuff for you or they make it very easy for you to do. We have some frameworks and libraries right here. These are the front-end frameworks. We are going to explore the difference between the front-end and the back-end really soon. But right here, we can see some front-end frameworks or libraries. We have React, which many would argue is not a framework, but a library. The difference right here is minimal. Then we have Angular and Vue at the end. So let's see how we could use some of these frameworks in our applications. This is where the front-end comes in. If you want to be a front-end developer, this is going to come really handy for you. Then we have the back-end developers. We're going to explain all the differences there. And then at the end, if you want to do both, you can actually choose front-end and the back-end to build something more full. Okay, so let's start with the front-end. So a front-end developer is the person who implements web designs through coding languages, like we learned them, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then you can pick some framework like React. On any site, you can see the work of a front-end developer in the navigation, layouts, even in the way that a site looks different on your phone and desktop. We talked about this. This is responsive design. So, which framework to choose? There will be many different recommendations by many different people. I personally use React, and I would say that it is currently the best choice that you can make. On the blue right here, we have Google Trends for React. We can see that it is growing. And in here we have Angular. React is definitely really popular right now, and there have been some surveys that show that React is the most loved framework out there. Now, as I mentioned, if you only want to do front-end, you can stop right here. Backend developer builds complex systems that have all kinds of logic that happen in the background that make the websites work. So if you don't have an eye for the design, this may be the place that you might want to be in. You're still in the web development field, but you don't have to worry about the button designs or proper fonts, colors, etc. And it is also a bit closer to traditional programming. Data needs to be stored and retrieved, business logic and rules need to be followed, and results need to be calculated. You need to work with databases as well. So this is where the JavaScript framework Node.js comes in. It allows JavaScript to be run on the backend. So if you want to take this route, then you can simply explore more on the topic of Node.js after you know all the basics of JavaScript, of course. And the last thing is the full stack web development. If you're working as a full stack developer, you can make use of your knowledge of both frontend and the backend. In here, you will need to pick a technology stack. Tech stack is the combination of programming languages, tools, and frameworks that developers use to create web application. In most cases, it is consisted of a client-side and a server-side language, plus a database. Really popular JavaScript full technology stack is so-called MERN stack. The M stands for the database, and it is called MongoDB. You can explore that as well. Then we have an Express, which is basically addition to the Node.js that allows us to make routes easier. We'll need to make a lot of routes if we are working on the backend. Then we have the front-end part or the client side, which is React. As I mentioned, I would strongly recommend it. I already have some of the projects on the JavaScript Mastery YouTube that you can use if you're building React applications. And at the end, we have the Node.js, which is a framework that enables us to run JavaScript on the backend. If you choose to be a full-stack developer, you will be able to build full-stack programming web interfaces. For example, Facebook is a full-stack web application. It needs to have a database to store users. It also needs to have a proper backend to handle all the logic in there. And it also needs to have a front-end or a client side, which will allow you to actually see all the profiles of users, the messages, and the feed of the Facebook, for example. It is a fun fact that React is actually built by the Facebook team, so Facebook developers. And finally, thank you for watching this video. Now you're at the end and you know what you need to do. First, go for the HTML, practice it a bit, then move on to the CSS. Finally, do JavaScript and really practice JavaScript. Once you know JavaScript really well, like closures, classes, imports, exports, ES6, arrow functions, and stuff like that, feel free to move on to React, which is an awesome front-end framework. Then, if you want to do backend, you can also learn Node.js. And finally, we have full-stack development. You need to choose a technology stack like MERN, and then you can make use of React on the front end and Node.js on the back end plus a database to actually be a full stack developer and build complex web applications. Now, I went through all of this really quickly and without any issues, like you need to know this, and this. But right here is where I would really like to slow down. Learning web development is not going to be easy. You're going to get stuck a lot of the times. It is really not simple, but it is doable. It is absolutely doable for anyone. You just need to have the will and you have to practice. With practice comes perfect, and if you practice a lot, you will be able to make it as a full stack developer without any issues, and I guarantee you that. So all that you need to have is time and effort. If you put that in, you're definitely going to make it. Thank you so much for coming to the end of this video. If you liked it, feel free to leave a like, and if you like the informative content that I post, also subscribe. As I mentioned, after the HTML and CSS, the hard JavaScript is going to come. And JavaScript is exactly the expertise of this channel. It is called JavaScript Mastery after all. So if you need some help with JavaScript, feel free to subscribe. Also, I'd like to emphasize that I'm currently in the process of creating a full JavaScript course. The course is going to be about JavaScript only, really covering all the fundamentals and then moving on to the expert things. The course is currently in the making process, so what you can do right now is sign up for the mailing list in the description down below. I'm going to keep you updated in the course making process, and you're definitely going to know when the course is released. Thank you so much, and now that you come to the end, feel free to open Visual Studio Code, feel free to open your browser and start learning.